Welcome to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum free Sunday lecture program. My name's Tom Sharpley, and I'm the manager of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, North Country Federal Credit Union, M&T Bank, and AARP of Vermont, and also CCTV, who is recording the program today. And we'd like to thank Snowflake Chocolates. At the end of the speech, there's going to be a box of Snowflake chocolates.
Oh my God.
There's enough for everybody to have one.
Oh
They're milk chocolate creams. Milk chocolate because the speech is about Vermont Milk Chocolate Company. And creams because the people have dentures, because we don't want caramels or nuts. All right. We have, there's a document on that table that you're free to take. Homestead Happenings that tells you about all the exciting events we have coming up. And so you don't need to take notes because I'm going to tell you about a few of them. You can just pick up one of these sheets. Next Saturday, August the 24th, is the flax harvest. I'm the gardener here and I'm leading the flax harvest. We're the only museum in Vermont that makes linen out of flax. And the flax crop this year was a disaster, but we're still having a flax harvest. We're going to pull the pathetic few strands of flax that actually grew this year out of the ground, and we're going to ripple them with a rippling comb. And you're going to want to attend that. It says it goes from 11 to 12:30. That's an hour and a half. We've got about 10 minutes worth of flax at the end. So I wouldn't count on it lasting that long. All right. And then September 15th is our next free monthly lecture. What's happening in the 2024 election? By Jeffrey Skelly, elections out analyst. Ooh, doesn't that sound intriguing? All right, and now I'd like to introduce one of my dearest friends, Phyllis, who was the president emeritus of the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum and is currently our treasurer, and she's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you, Tom. Hello again. It's been a while since I've been up here. Sorry I croaked a little bit, so that's just, this old age business that's coming on all the time. But anyway, here I am trying to introduce Tom here, who is going to speak to us today about the chocolate factory. That sounds like fun, doesn't it? He's done a lot of research. And Professor Thomas Durant Visser, head of the University of Vermont History Department, has been researching the history of Burlington, Vermont. In addition to nominating numerous historical properties and districts to the National Historic Register of Historic Places, forgive my messing up, he is guiding students in his UVM Historic Preservation courses in a series of class research projects posted online as the Historic Burlington District. And we all know we live in this great historic era, age and area here, because here we are on this land that has been here for tens of thousands of years and been used all the time, and it's part of Burlington and Burlington history, which makes it a special place to be and talk about the history of the area. He's an active member of the community. He served on the City of Burlington as chair of the Design Review Board, chair of the Design Advisory Committee, and chair of the Historic Preservation Review Committee. He has also served the State of Vermont by gubernatorial appointment as a district environmental commissioner member. He was a co-founder and board member of Preservation Burlington. So he's got lots of titles. He's worked around here for quite a few years. He's author of the award-winning book, Field Guide to New England Farms and Farm Buildings. And of course, that's what brings a lot of people here to Vermont to look at it and see what's going on. And his most recently published book, Porches of North America, examines the social history of this liminal architectural feature in the United States and Canada. And I think we can all imagine ourselves on a front porch, just relaxing and looking around. It's too bad they seem to have done away with a lot of front porches now, but that seems to be a good looking in the area all around here. So now, to allow him to do what he's come here to do, we
Well,
welcome Tom.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you, Tom, for the introduction, and welcome, everybody. It's great to see everybody here today. This is a research project that I started for my recent sabbatical. I've been teaching here at the University of Vermont since the mid-1980s. I'm still at it, coming back in the fall. And so in my latest sabbatical break, I started looking broadly at the history of manufacturing in Burlington. And I kind of, as sometimes we do as researchers, we stumble on something that I hadn't heard about before. And the more I dug, the more it got to be interesting, I found. And so that's what I'm here to do, is to share it with you all today. So the little bit of setting the stage here. So this is the building that, this is the building we're going to be exploring. Some of you may know it. It's off of Flynn Avenue, or on Flynn Avenue in Burlington's south end, opposite the recently built Onion River Co-op building. And it's also kind of coincidentally right next door to the new Champlain Parkway construction that's going in there. So I think we're going to see a lot more than we used to. But anyway, during the COVID lockdown of a few years ago, like many of you, you know what it was like. We were home alone. What are we going to do? And as a researcher, without access to libraries, it was virtually only online. Or the other thing that I kind of started to dig into were those boxes of inherited papers and photographs. I mean, I'm sure many of you have them. You know, they've been passed along. And, you know, out of that, I came across a few kind of threads of information that related to my family history, but it also kind of connected more broadly. And I think this is sort of one of my sub-themes for the day, is to think about what we might call public history, okay? It's the information that we have that's associated with our families and friends, and how can we share that? How can we learn from it, and so on. So during this project, this sabbatical project, it also, which indeed grew out of, as Phyllis mentioned, many years of doing projects here in Burlington with our wonderful graduate students, especially, some of which we published online. I remember working with the museum here when it first opened up, and so on. But through this sabbatical research project, it was perhaps one of the most poignant experiences was connecting with one of my former students who graduated from the program, Alfred Holden. Alfred, could you raise your hand? There we go. And because Alfred is now the caretaker of an archive of family history, which turned out to be critically important to tell the story that I'm going to share with you today. And it is, as such, it was during the process of doing the research that Alfred's mother, Burlington Sylvia Heiniger Holden, passed away. And it was really quite touching because, I was chatting with Sylvia, I mean, literally, days before she got ill, about this project, and then these things happen. So again, for that reason, I'd really like to dedicate this afternoon's talk to the memory of Sylvia Heiniger Holden. Yeah. So just moving ahead, what I want to do is start in the year 1917, okay? So we're going to turn back the clock of history, and so on February 2nd, cold winter day, Friday on February 2nd, 1917, over 100 optimistic Burlington business leaders gathered in the old Hotel Vermont. You recognize it. It's in the corner of Main Street and St. Paul Street. to hear a pitch for an investment opportunity to build a major new milk chocolate factory here in Burlington. Many of those in attendance at this Burlington Businessmen's Association certainly, were thinking about some of the previous successes in the city, and there was a lot of optimism and hope going on. Nevertheless, the timing of that meeting, of course, in 1917, was one where there were certainly threatening clouds on the horizon, if we can put it that way. The United States was not yet in World War I. Nevertheless, the war was raging in Europe. And so there were those locally, however, who were looking for investment opportunities. And it was within that context that people were looking around, reflecting on the successes that Burlington had had. Here's the view from the top of the Hotel Vermont, looking out towards the lake. And we can see, this Burlington at that time really had a very vigorous commercial and industrial economy. Just prior to this meeting, within a year prior to this 1917 meeting, Union Station had opened up down at the foot of Main Street. After a lot of political wrangling and everything else, it brought together the Rutland Railroad and the Central Vermont Railroad into this big passenger station, and what a showplace it was. But also, barely a week before this meeting at the Hotel Vermont that I just mentioned, the Burlington Free Press reported that the work of tearing down the old railway station would be rushed to completion as soon as the site could be cleared by a force of surveyors brought down from St. Albans in preparation of an entire reconstruction of the railroad's local yard. The old brick landmark, of course, this is at the foot of College Street, okay, right by the community boathouse right now, okay, was supposed to be leveled to the ground by March 1st, and so that's sort of, we're at that cusp of change when all of this was going on. But before we go further, I want to step back a little bit further into the historic context, okay, for Burlington, and especially its industrial heritage. Because indeed, right here in Burlington and Winooski and so on, there are over 2 centuries of manufacturing with mills and workshops and factories that have been producing a very wide range of materials for local, national, and international markets. And of course, we have the falls at Winooski. This was taken right at the aftermath of the 1927 flood. We see the grist mill in the foreground. We see Chase Mill behind. But there's so much that's been going on over the years that's really been focusing on manufacturing in our area. But with the opening of the Champlain Canal at the southern end of Lake Champlain in 1823, that made it possible to connect Burlington with New York City via the Hudson River. And then with the opening of the Chambly Canal, heading north to the St. Lawrence River by the 1850s, Burlington became an international place for manufacturing and trade. And especially during this era, when there was still a lot of canal transportation. But by the early 1850s, of course, the railroads came in, and Burlington also served as a key linkage, if you will, between the Atlantic and the West, between North and South. So Burlington had the benefits of geography, okay? It also had access, because of the waterways, to the abundant forests of the north in Canada, okay? So wood was being brought down from Quebec and from Ontario. It was being manufactured into all kinds of things on the Burlington waterfront. Kilburn and Gates Cottage Furniture Manufactory. This factory still stands on Pine Street, okay? So But one of the most prominent sort of examples of the very late 1800s development of manufacturing in Burlington was the massive Queen City Cotton Company factory that was built on Lakeside Avenue. Okay, it still stands, and in 1899 it was expanded, and you see in the foreground the electric-powered streetcar system was bringing employees from the city area, from Winooski and so on, to this big factory. This was a huge factory. It was powered by burning coal. The coal would come in by the railroads, and then with that huge smokestack that still stands today, okay, that was then would turn a mechanical method of powering the looms. Okay, so it was owned and run by the Draper Corporation, which was headquartered in Hopewell, Massachusetts. So again, we have an example of an out-of-state firm coming into Burlington, sort of taking advantage of the location, local labor, but it was again, sure, there were some local investors and maybe on the board, but it was mainly run by an out-of-state firm. Soon, the Queen City Cotton Company, however, it did become the largest employer in the state of Vermont. It was the largest taxpayer in the city in 1917, when all this was kind of unfolding. But working conditions at the factory brought on broad social concerns, not only in the Burlington area, but indeed nationally. Okay, and not just this factory. It's what was going on during this progressive era where there was the widespread use of child labor. Okay, and this is a very famous photograph is now in the Library of Congress that was taken by Lewis Hine in 1909, documenting how children were basically spending most of their time. They're not in school, and they were being employed in these factories. So where we are here, sort of in this 1917 era, when we're talking about today's story, it's just kind of in this progressive era. People are asking, okay, is it time to make some changes and so on? So it's within this context that we can go back to this February 2nd, 1917 meeting in the Hotel Vermont, where the head of the Burlington Merchants Association called the meeting to order on this Friday afternoon, and he introduced Fred H. Roberts, who was the president of the Massachusetts Chocolate Company. At the time, this Boston-based candy firm was one of the largest producers of chocolate in the United States. It had been incorporated in 1910 as a subsidiary of the F.H. Roberts Company of Boston, manufacturers of Apollo chocolate and candy brand. And you can see there one of their factories in Boston. And so Mr. Roberts had learned to make candy at an early age in Maine and in Rhode Island. And by 1917, he was a very wealthy individual, and he served as a director in Boston's United States Trust Company. So also at that meeting, Fred H. Roberts was introduced, and Roberts came in. He was the general manager and director of the Massachusetts company, and he had had previous chocolate making experience in Philadelphia before joining the Boston firm in 1914. So Walker, as we see here, presented a very carefully worded statement to the assembled group of business people in the Hotel Vermont. And here are some of the details of the investment proposal that was laid out on that Friday afternoon as it was described in the Burlington Free Press. Our object in coming to Burlington is to start a milk chocolate factory. We have chosen your city because it appeals to us better than any location we have seen. We want the people of Burlington interested in the new company. We do not want any money except as an investment on which we can assure a good return. Okay. So, and he went on to say that they had outgrown the factory in Boston. They wanted to expand, and they saw Burlington as a great opportunity to tap into local labor and, also curry some local investments. He even went on to talk about how there was going to be an issue of both common stock and preferred stock, and $300,000 of the preferred stock would be available, of which $200,000 of which would be available to Burlington investors, but the Massachusetts firm would also owe $200,000 of common stock, and ultimately, the whole scheme, if you will, was to bring in local investors. However, the Massachusetts firm would still have control of the company. Okay? Rather than owning the new factory in Burlington, the property and equipment would be leased to this new company called the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company by a real estate investment trust entity. Get where we're going with this, right? Okay, so that's it. So immediately, who stood up next? Prominent Burlington banker Charles P. Smith. Some of you may, recall hearing about him, who spoke very positively about the Massachusetts Chocolate Company based on recommendations he'd received from his Boston banker friends. And as one of Burlington's most distinguished business leaders, he was the president and chairman of the board of the Burlington Savings Bank. He served terms in the Vermont House of Representatives and in the Vermont State Senate. And his home, which still stands, we can see here at 227 South Willard Street in the Hill section, which is now Champlain College's McDonald Hall. The next person who got up to speak was John J. Flynn, the name you may know about here. So he was the vice president of the Burlington Traction Company, an electric streetcar network. He was a local real estate developer, and he concurred. And he said, quote, "It is a good thing for Burlington. It will help the farmers of the county. I strongly favor this proposal." He also lived in the Hill section, right next door to Charles P. Smith, in the beautiful Italianate-style mansion at 251 South Willard Street, that's also now part of the Champlain College campus. But perhaps best known for his namesake, the Flynn Theater, John J. Flynn also served as the vice president of the Chittenden Trust Company, which has evolved into whatever today is M&T Bank. Some of you have been around for a while. You remember we had a Chittenden Trust Company here in town. And he served as the vice president of the Elias Lyman Coal Company. So very, very well connected. So by February 27th, just within a few weeks, it was announced that a site for a new chocolate factory had been selected in Burlington on the south end, and that Fred H. Roberts and John Walker from Boston had secured an option for this property from John J. Flynn, okay, the landowner of the 15-acre site that I've kind of marked out here in red, that abuts the Rutland Railroad line, and it's on what at the time was called Park Avenue, but today it's called Flynn Avenue in honor of, you get it, John J. Flynn. Okay? So not to miss an opportunity, local investors eagerly scrambled to acquire over $150,000 of stock in this new Vermont Milk Chocolate Company within a week. Okay? Some of the big subscribers were, of course, Charles P. Smith, the banker, and a number of the other bankers and big investors in town. So, I mean, just for orientation, this is the factory as we see it today. Okay, you see, the railroad line that's going through. It's right adjacent to where this new under construction Champlain Parkway is going on, and it's right across the street from the South End Onion River Co-op building. So. And on the way to Oak Ledge Park and so on. So on March 22nd, 1917, John Walker and Fred H. Roberts returned to Burlington from Boston with detailed blueprints and engineering specifications for 2 multi-story manufacturing buildings for the new chocolate factory. Each building measured 150 feet long and 80 feet wide, and they were produced by their consulting engineer from Boston, William Edmondson. These plans were shared with the Burlington Merchants Association and the local Chamber of Commerce when over 200 people attended a very festive banquet held in the main dining room of the Hotel Vermont. After receiving according to the Free Press, a quote, royal welcome at the dinner event, John Walker, the newly designated president of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company and manager of the Vermont Milk Chocolate, he was also manager of the Massachusetts Chocolate Company, confirmed that the first part of the Burlington Chocolate Company would be built on John J. Flynn's South End property, and it would be construction would go to the lowest bidder, Burlington contractor James E. Cashman. According to the Daily News, Burlington Daily News, J.E. Cashman, who last night was awarded the contract for the construction of the building of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company, already has about 200,000 bricks on the scene. These bricks are those taken down from the old railroad station, which is being torn down. Work on the new structure will not begin for several days, although the contract calls for completion of the building by July 15th. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 5 months from, to get this whole factory up and running, taking down the bricks from the old train station and putting them into the factory. When work does start, however, it will be done in the Cashman style, quote, and anybody looking for employment can have it. Like John Flynn, Mr. Cashman was also a big initial investor in the new Vermont Milk Chocolate Company. His $85,979 bid for constructing the factory was just $133 less than the next bidder, the Kieslick Construction Company of Burlington. So here are the plans. According to John Walker's statement, the new chocolate factory would be built as follows. The building will not be of a strictly fireproof construction, being what is known in the trade as a slow burning building. Hard pine will be used for timbers, and the building will have a 12-inch brick curtain wall with 2-foot pilasters. The building will have a frontage of 73 feet and a depth of 150 feet. Half of this will be 3 stories in height, and the other half, a smaller part, will be 2 stories in height, and then a further part would have 1 story. So then, things are moving right ahead. On March 31st, 1917, okay, we're talking less than 2 months later, right? The Burlington voters overwhelmingly approved granting a 10-year tax exemption for the buildings, fixtures, and property of the new chocolate company. This resolution noted that an association called Burlington Realty Trust, formed by Fred H. Rogers, John Walker, and John J. Flynn, had purchased the property in Burlington for the erection of the buildings that would be leased to the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company for its exclusive use. The resolution from the city mandated that at least $125,000 be invested in constructing at least 1 building for this new business there during the year of 1917. They really had to get going on it. John Walker also announced at a grand banquet that a huge supply of cocoa beans had just been purchased for nearly $1 million by his firm, and that it would be shipped to Burlington within the next several months for use by the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company factory. Globally, cocoa bean supplies and prices were in flux due to the First World War, and concerns were being raised about how workers on cocoa bean plantations were being treated. especially on Portugal's São Tomé island colony, seen here barely, you can see it on the upper left of this historic map. It's located off the west coast of Africa, northwest of Angola. And this is where cocoa had been brought from Brazil in the 1820s, and it was being cultivated. Although slavery was officially abolished there in 1869, conditions among the African contract cocoa bean plantation workers on São Tomé Island were reported to be very dire. Concerns were raised about whether they were actually coerced to work there. This received worldwide attention in 1906 when an expose by Henry Nevison, published in Harper's, asked whether such contract labor at these sites actually could be considered periodical slavery. Although this prompted a boycott of the São Tomé cocoa beans by Cadbury and other British and European chocolate manufacturers, the major American firms, including Hershey's and Baker's, took advantage of a bulk commodity trading scheme, if you will, that masked the sources of the cocoa beans. And with reduced wholesale prices for cocoa beans, the São Tomé Island beans soon became the largest source of cocoa beans in the world. So, April 17th, President Woodrow Wilson formally declared a resolution of the United States Congress declaring war against Germany. Many men from Burlington and beyond responded to this call to serve their country. Here we see a corps of reserve officers being trained, parading down Church Street on Burlington on April 26, 1917. Okay? One who immediately enlisted was my grandfather, Durant Visser lad, who may have passed through Burlington en route to from his home in Massachusetts to obtain U.S. officer training at the Plattsburgh camp in Plattsburgh, New York. To my surprise, this family history, of which I knew very, very little about, but kind of started to come to light during the COVID, digging through some old boxes and so on, also intersects with the story of the global context of cocoa bean trade, which I'll be telling you about in a few minutes. After his Army officer training in Plattsburgh, my grandfather, Lieutenant Ladd, was stationed in France, and in early 1918, he was gassed. And he was very seriously wounded while conducting a machine gun battalion in the trenches of the Apremont Forest in the Saint-Mihiel area in the south of France, where he was hospitalized for many, many months. 6 months after his return from France to America, Lieutenant Ladd was commissioned by the United States Shipping Board to serve as a special investigator to travel to the west coast of Africa to research the potential for American businesses to serve the needs of West Africa and also to potentially find opportunities for international trade. My grandfather did have a background in business, and how this all happened, who knows? But, you know, he's a fairly young man, but his professional report titled Trade and Shipping in West Africa was published in 1920 by the United States Printing Office, and it included references to the African cocoa bean production and other trade opportunities and issues. He found that although during the early 19-teens, the global demand for such items as chocolate had increased, which had produced strong economic incentives for investments in cocoa plantations to boost the cocoa bean productions along the west coast of Africa. However, the maritime hostilities that happened during the First World War for such raw materials as cocoa beans had created a significant oversupply. That, in turn, created opportunities for American businesses who could get the cheap cocoa beans that were not to be used in Europe because of the war. So you see the context that's going on here. So the global impacts of these findings on the West African trade by Durant lad ultimately would be felt by those associated with the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory right here in Burlington, as well as by other investors, entrepreneurs, and indeed working families. Despite the tensions over America's declaration of war and ongoing political debates over prohibition and women's suffrage, the right to vote, many in Burlington were still optimistic during the spring of that tumultuous year of 1917. In May, it was reported that real estate demand in Burlington's South End was very, very strong, especially for small homes in the new subdivisions near the new chocolate factory, which was under construction. Devin Coleman, state historian, our new UVM lecturer and director, raise your hand, because you've done a lot of research on this part of the story too, right? Okay. So in June 1917, William Schofield, who had been appointed the treasurer of Vermont Milk Chocolate Company, told the Burlington Daily News that the business potential for the chocolate business was unusually rosy. It was also announced in the press that the chocolate company had just received a huge order for chocolate from the United States Navy, and that their Boston plant was so overwhelmed that they had to extend the shifts. Nevertheless, construction work on the new Burlington chocolate factory was lagging, reportedly due to a shortage of construction workers, as we can imagine, as so many men were going off to war. Late in 1917, another big construction project started in Burlington, and that was the building of a new syrup factory for the Welch brothers on the corner of Marble Avenue and Pine Street. Recognize the building? Many of you? Okay. Later sold to the Pennick & Ford Company, the nationally known Vermont-made pancake syrup that was produced here was a maple and cane sugar blend that consumed up to 1 million pounds of maple syrup per year by the 1930s. The contract for constructing this large brick building, designed by Burlington architect Frank L. Austin, was awarded to Burlington's Kieslick Construction Company. But within days, rumors were also flying around that the Kieslick Construction Company was going to be replacing the J.E. Cashman Construction Company to do work on the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory project. So this was confirmed on August 24th, 1917, that indeed the Kieslick Construction Company, headquartered here in Burlington, was going to be taking over the construction project. And the Kieslick firm soon posted advertisements in Burlington and Rutland newspapers seeking to employ dozens of union carpenters for the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company factory construction project. Noted for their engineering and the construction and engineering of many of Burlington's most important office buildings, industrial sites, and civic buildings of the era, the Kieslick Construction Company had been founded in 1915 by Albert Kieslick, an engineer with experience in construction, and Oscar Heiniger, a former superintendent at the Burlington Water Department. Alfred Heiniger, who had previously worked in sales for the Boston Edison Illuminating Company, joined the Kieslick Construction Company several years later and served as the firm's lawyer, secretary, and treasurer. And in this photo, courtesy of Alfred Holden, thank you very much, from the family archives. Alfred, what is your relationship to?
Well, that's my grandfather, straight ahead.
Yeah.
Slightly on the left. And I believe this office is upstairs from Looning's. And there's a room there where I think you can rent that room and you can be in that room.
Very good. Exactly. So yeah. And it's Alfred Kieslich, the general manager, is in the big desk on the right, and Alfred's.
He's wearing fancy shoes.
So on November 7th, 1917, despite the setbacks attributed to bad weather and so on, Burlington's new chocolate factory was said to be ready to start production within 2 weeks, or as soon as the hydroelectric power could be supplied from the Burlington Light and Power Company on a line of high voltage wires that would run from its power plant at the Winooski Gorge down to the site in the Burlington's south end. However, a legal dispute over the electrical power lines, the right-of-way, and so on, was tied up in the courts. And it was only resolved in late November, the 27th, when payment was made to one reluctant owner that they could get the power lines connected along the right-of-way. Although the work of installing the manufacturing equipment was nearly finished at the new factory and the materials had arrived for the cocoa and chocolate production, those electrical power lines from the hydroelectric plant had still not been connected by December 20th of 1917 due to the lingering legal issues. The clock is ticking, right? You know, you've got carloads of cocoa beans, you got the contracts, everybody's ready to work. Nevertheless, John Walker, the president, came up from Boston and explained that the new factory would be running by the beginning of January, within a week or so, starting with hiring about 100 of what he referred to, as girls, to be employed to wrap the chocolates and with the help of machinery. He confirmed that the company's goal was to have between 200 and 300 employees working at the plant within a month. As many of the workers as possible would be hired locally, but some supervisors would be brought in from Boston as well for training and management. In an editorial that was soon published in the Burlington Free Press, there was a major observation that this factory represented a major step forward because it was using hydroelectric power to run all the machinery rather than using the old coal-powered mechanical methods or even the earlier mechanical water-powered, turning the water wheels and the turbines and so on. So we have a major step forward in technology that's represented by the construction of this firm. This became extremely important during the winter of 1917 and 1918 because there was abnormally cold weather and there was a very severe national coal shortage. But Burlington had the hydropower now from the new hydro mill at the Gorge. So 1918 started especially well for the Burlington Milk Chocolate Company as they received a $1 million order that came through the Massachusetts Chocolate Company to produce nearly 2.5 million pounds of their Norfolk sweet chocolates and over 300,000 pounds of their Juanita brand sweet chocolates, all to be exported abroad through the New York-based Dominion Trading Company. By mid-January, John Walker announced that manufacturing was well underway at the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company with 25,000 pounds of cocoa butter and their Juanita brand of breakfast cocoa already produced. He also noted that they had another order on hand for 40,000 pounds of chocolate flavoring for a New York biscuit company, and that within 4 months they expected to be making 75 tons of chocolate a day. Okay. And then, within 2 weeks, 2 more huge orders arrived. This time for the Belgian Relief Commission to assist with feeding millions of starving inhabitants of Belgium, which had been occupied by German military forces since 1914. It was also said that the previously announced large order of the company's Juanita sweet chocolate bars would be shipped by rail to New York by November 1918, where it would be loaded onto relief ships bound for Europe, and especially for Belgium. The Commission for Relief of Belgium had been established as a charity fund by Herbert Hoover, later to become president, and others in October 1914, shortly after the start of World War I. Much of the organization's financial support came from American donations solicited by statewide committees. To respond to the flood of orders, the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company published classified advertisements in local newspapers in early February seeking 25 male workers and, quote, 25 girls for wrapping and packaging in the packaging department. Meanwhile, however, there were some shocking accusations about ground glass being found in some of the Massachusetts chocolate company's Juanita brand chocolate candy that had been sold to soldiers down at Fort Dix, the U.S. Army base in Wrightsburg, New Jersey. And these were widely reported in American newspapers in February 1918. According to the Washington Post, John Walker was immediately dispatched down there, and he issued a report saying that this report in the national newspapers coming out of Fort Dix has played us into the wrong light with the general public and will cause us a large money loss. The facts as represented, we believe, to be absolutely false and the findings unwarranted. We demand that there be a free and open investigation covering the whole matter. Within weeks, a federal War Department investigation determined, however, that the few large particles of glass, perhaps that had accidentally gone into a chocolate bar from a broken jar, it was not ground glass, had been found by just one soldier on the Army base. And as a result, the whole shipment from the chocolate company was removed, and everyone, including the soldiers, were reassured that they could start eating the chocolate bars again, and that the U.S. Surgeon General found that there was absolutely no evidence that there was any plot to poison the U.S. troops. All this is in national press, unfolding it. Okay, so just as everything looked so good and so optimistic, tragedy struck here in Burlington on Thursday night, October 25th, 1918, when a violent explosion rocked Burlington's new Vermont Milk Chocolate Company factory, which was soon engulfed in flames. The following vivid description of the catastrophe was published the next day in the Burlington Free Press. The fire, which has cost a loss of over $2 million, started from an internal explosion, as far as could be ascertained, last night in the shipping room, which was located on the first floor of the small L, which adjoined the main building of 4 stories. It was about 10 minutes before 10 before a deafening explosion occurred, like the sound of a cannon that boomed through the room, the sound seeming to come from the elevator well. The flames seemed to shoot from the first story of the L to the top story, where the business office of the concern offices were located, and it went down to the basement where the cocoa cooling room was located. It went by way of the elevator and there through the fireproof doors leading to floors that had not yet been closed by employees, and they ran out doing everything they could to save their lives. Soon the flames spread through the big factory from the L, and the water that was available did little or no good to quench the flames. There was way too much inflammable material inside to fight it with water, and it was soon seen that the building was doomed and that all efforts would be powerless. 6 cars, however, of finished product that had been packed recently for shipment to New York en route to Belgium were saved by spectators who literally pushed those box cars on the tracks away from the factory as it burned that night. This disastrous fire at the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory came as an absolute shock to the city of Burlington, as 3 workers were killed. It was also feared that about 700 men and women employees at the new factory would be out of work. Okay? It was further reported that the explosion at 9:30 in the shipping room had immediately cost the lives of the 3 workers who were there. When the firemen arrived with their apparatus, they found there was not sufficient pressure from the water system to put out the fire. Tons upon tons of cocoa beans soaked in oil were made very flammable, and in a short time, the factory was a mass of flames. The company was engaged in filling the order for the Belgian Relief Commission. So there was immediately, the next day, a funeral for the watchman, David Upton, who was killed in the fire. And the next day, John Walker, the manager and president of the board of directors of the company, came back up from Boston along with his boss, and they immediately announced the very next day that they were going to rebuild. On the site as soon as possible. That Saturday afternoon, they had an event at the New Sherwood Hotel, and Burlington Judge Charles Darling pledged that the city would do anything it legally could to assist with reconstructing the factory. Mr. Walker received a strong ovation by the group and assured everybody that the investments in the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company were strong, and he spoke on behalf of the board of directors to express their sympathy for what had happened, and he declared that business prospects were so strong that the replacement factory in Burlington would be even larger than the one that had just been lost by fire. By the end of 1918, or by May of 1918, the insurance adjusters had reviewed the situation, and work was underway to remove the fire-charred factory remains. And indeed, some of the foundations, some of the bricks in the power plant section of the building were reused, and they still stand there today. Okay, so new plans for the replacement milk chocolate factory were immediately drawn up by a firm from Boston. However, this time they separated the manufacturing area from the shipping functions in 2 separate buildings to provide fire breaks. And rather than 3 or 4 stories high, the building would just be 2 stories. Nevertheless, because of the national war effort, it soon became apparent that the context for making chocolate was changing. Within days of announcing the reconstruction, the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company purchased a 35-year-old factory building on the Burlington waterfront in downtown at the corner of Main Street and Battery Street. Okay, so in reference, this is a Sanborn map. Main Street on the bottom, Battery Street on the left, waterfront to the left, and the pink Adams Mission Home is now the Pomerleau Agency. Okay, and you get Burlington, Church Street, and so on off to the right. So there's a big factory down there. And this factory had been used for manufacturing wooden boxes. At that point, when they bought the factory, it had been making wooden ammunition boxes for the World War effort. And it was assumed that the chocolate factory would be using this maybe for making shipping cases and so on. However, it soon became clear that they had something quite different in mind. Within days, they started demolishing this factory because there was this national shortage of building supplies. So they took down this factory, a force of 100 men under the direction of the Kiesler Construction Company had that building completely, this factory completely taken down in a number of days. Okay? All the heavy trucks in the area that were available were brought in to cart the heavy timbers, the wood, the bricks, everything they could down to what's now Flint Avenue to reconstruct the new chocolate factory because they had contracts to fill. They had workers they wanted to get going. All hands on deck. Anybody in Burlington who wants work can get a job. Just come right down. And indeed, it continued. Within months, John Walker announced that the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company had accepted another huge $1.5 million contract from the Belgian government to produce another 4.5 million tons of chocolate, okay, including their baking cocoa, all to be shipped by September of 1918. The clock is ticking. I mean, it was reported, however, during this period that the Burlington employees were still being paid, that a lot of the material had been temporarily stored in boxcars, and they were just scrambling to try to rebuild as soon as possible. But then we had something else that came along. Okay. On August 6th, 1918, an ominous challenge was reported. And that is when crew members of a Standard Oil steamer were taken off of this boat on Lake Champlain. They were brought into Vergennes because they had contracted the dreaded Spanish influenza. Within weeks, this influenza epidemic had spread across the U.S., across Europe, and it was in Burlington. Okay? So many people in Burlington soon contracted the disease that the Ethan Allen Club that was on College Street had to be converted into a temporary hospital. The hospitals were full, rest homes, families broadly were stricken with the disease. Among those immediately stricken by the illness were the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company president, John Walker, and his 20-year-old son. Both received care at the Green Mountain Sanitarium on Pearl Street in Burlington for several days. They went home by train, but after a weekend break, John Walker was back to announce that the new chocolate factory would resume production within a week. Nevertheless, it would be running by the start of 1919. It's also announced that he had more contracts. By October, it was reported that the influenza epidemic in Burlington, people were getting better every day. And that, however, due to the illness, there were a seriously limited number of construction workers available to rebuild the factory that had just burned down. So that was being delayed. Nevertheless, there were the pressure for those contracts. Although the Burlington Water Department had worked to improve the volume and pressure of the water to be delivered to the rebuilt Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory, the insurance companies and city fire commissioners demanded that tests be conducted to make sure there's going to be enough water pressure in case something else happened again. It came up to the Board of Aldermen, and to address these concerns, the Burlington Board of Aldermen unanimously approved allocating funds to lay 3,000 feet of new 12-inch cast iron pipe in a new ditch running south along Pine Street from Lakeside Avenue to Park Avenue to serve the chocolate factory and to the nearby neighborhoods. City tax funds immediately. Everybody out, dig the ditch, get the water down there so they can open the factory, and so on. Within 3 weeks, they had that trench was being dug, and that water line was being laid. They were taking advantage of the federal situation to say that it was a priority that got around all kinds of embargoes and so on materials because of the war effort to get the pipes. Meanwhile, to fight the fight was going on in the Great War. Soldiers were still certainly being shipped from New York and so on. However, in November 11th of 1918, it was announced that an armistice had been reached and a grand victory parade was held here in downtown Burlington, celebrating the end of the war. Within days, the Burlington Free Press featured an article headlining, "Burlington manufacturers expect prosperity for many years and are not worrying about any reaction following the end of the war." John Walker cannot foresee any let-up in his business to come. He is of the opinion that prosperity will be unparalleled through the country. Without any effort of a kind, we will be going full speed ahead for 2 years and probably much longer because of the orders that will be coming in. 1919, however, started with a rather inauspicious omen for the top officers of the Burlington milk chocolate, or Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory, when shortly after 6 o'clock in the morning, on January 2nd, 1919, the Central Vermont Railway's overnight sleeper car from Boston crashed into a line of empty freight cars at the Winooski Railroad Station, and on board in the Pullman car were John Walker and Fred H. Roberts. Fortunately, neither of them were injured, but it was a big, embarrassing train wreck to start the year. Nevertheless, with continued optimism, the F.H. Roberts Company, John Walker, continued to talk up the prospects for the Burlington-based Vermont Milk Chocolate Company. And they even soon took out advertisements that in essence were trying to sell more stock. Okay? So the notice for the stock announcement signed by John Walker stated it has always been the policy of the management to never pay dividends on common stock until the surplus is equal to 60% of the preferred. And I mean, you can see they're looking for more investment locally. Okay, within 2 months, John Walker, with his son, took a trip to Havana, Cuba, and there they negotiated the purchase of large volumes of cane sugar to be used in the manufacture of chocolate to be made at the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory. His plan was to further expand the factory down there with another big building, and these other buildings would be making labels and doing the packaging and so on. It was also reported at the time that John Walker's son-in-law, Ernest A. Linderholm, had purchased a new home for his family, and his wife, Mrs. Linderholm, the former Natalie Walker, had become very involved in the Burlington political scene and so on, serving as a ballot clerk in Burlington's Ward 6 in September of 1920, which was the first Vermont state primary election when over 1,000 new voters, mainly women, were added to the city checklist after the recent federal ratification of the 19th Amendment of the Constitution, providing for equal rights for women to vote in the United States. A Phi Beta Kappa Radcliffe graduate, Natalie Walker Linderholm, would later become nationally known for her leadership in social service groups, including the Vermont Children's Aid Society, the Family Welfare Society of Boston, the Russell Sage Foundation, and the American Women's Foundation. With a bold headline in the Burlington Daily News announcing new industry to hire 500 persons, there was an explanation that yet another new brick factory would soon go up down at the site of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory site. But this one was going to be conveyed to the Miller Milk Chocolate Company, which was allied with the F.H. Roberts Company, the parent firm of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company. You ever heard of the name Ponzi? Things start to get interesting here. Okay. George Miller was the president of the Miller Chocolate Company. John Walker served as his treasurer, and although the two companies would be sharing the same factory building, it was stressed in the news that they would be run as separate businesses and that George Miller would move to Burlington. And anyway, things were getting rather complicated. To accommodate the plans, it was announced that this new addition on the north, which still stands today, would be leased out, and that more big contracts had just come in with that. With World War II over, on July 4th, 1919, there was a huge celebration here in Burlington, as you can well imagine. It was a really hot summer day, and chocolates were distributed to folks on Church Street in the parade, but it was so hot that not everybody hung out downtown. A lot of people went out for the car. Alfred Holden, thank you very much for your family archives. There's the family in their touring car, and they took a little drive. I'm not sure if they went there, but just about everybody else went down to North Beach, where there was the big opening of North Beach. This is July 4th, 1919, and to top off the festivities, a seaplane actually landed on the beach. This is pretty new technology, and so anyway. Okay, so although the stock market, the American stock market, had been surging during the summer of 1919, there were also huge waves of underlying economic uncertainties going on. The war was over, okay? What about all of those soldiers coming back? What was going on with the economy, and so on? What was going on with consumer demand? What was going on with inflation? There was an awful lot of concerns that were sort of getting people worried. Nevertheless, John Walker had an interview in the Burlington Free Press, and he went out to say, there is no sound reason why Burlington, if it shows proper spirit, should not be a model city and double the population in the next 10 years. Not only can we double the population, but we can triple the tax property. To do this, two things are needed: good roads and high-class houses. Everything else will take care of itself. Progressive ideas must be used from now, and we must be getting started immediately. So at the time, however, there were issues with housing. Serious issues with housing, as you can imagine, because this big factory came in, there was a huge demand for it. Where were the people going to be living? For this project, I spent a fair amount of time scanning through the city directories and finding that many of the workers, employee VTM, Vermont Milk Chocolate Company, were actually rooming and boarding in houses scattered all over the city. Old North End, all over, and there was a housing shortage, a huge housing shortage. So nevertheless, ironically, on the same day that John Walker made his big speech about the big opportunities in Burlington, there was a strike. What happened was that 100 of the women who were working in the chocolate wrapping department were told that their summer piecework pay raise was going to be reduced. Middle of the summer, it's hot, and they're told their pay is going to be cut. They were not pleased. Okay? A few stayed to work, but most of them walked out in the morning. Okay? So far, so good until lunch break. The women who had stayed inside came outside. Tensions, you can imagine, boiled over. And the head of the department, Everett Buck, ordered his assistant foreman, Henry LaPointe, to go out and quell the strikers. In the chaos, one of the women, Miss Harriet Garvey, was injured. After losing consciousness, she was taken home by ambulance. The striking workers, the women striking workers, were of course furious. They demanded to meet with President Walker immediately, promising to quit if they didn't get their pay raise back right then and there. Henry LaPointe, the one who had tried to quell the unrest, was immediately arrested, charged with breach of peace, and he was put on bail pending a hearing in city court. The next morning, 20 mail workers in the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company's shipping department declared they would also go on strike. On Thursday, even a larger number of workers at the factory said they were going to go on strike unless they would get an 8-hour workday and an increase of 15% in wages. About 300 of the chocolate company workers met that evening in downtown Burlington to discuss forming a new trade union associated with the American Federation of Labor. President John Walker, of course, is back in Boston, got on the next train, came up the rush back to Burlington, and on that Saturday, July 26th, he informed the press that the employment matter had stemmed from a misunderstanding, that the previous pay raise had not been approved by him, and he said, "I consider this strike to be very ill-advised. I consider that it was very poorly handled, both by the employees and the representatives of our company. It could have been easily avoided if somebody had just gotten in touch with me and we would have worked it out." Yeah, okay. But because it was so hot, he said he would approve the piecework rate of 2.5 cents per carton of these Norfolk sweets until the 1st of September for the female workers. At that time, the male workers were being paid hourly wages. The women were being paid piecework in the hot factory. No air conditioning. Mr. Walker went on to say, "We are not going to employ any strikers. We're going to keep an open shop," meaning no union. "Any worker who is willing to live up to the rules, we shall welcome back on Monday morning. But anyone who is dissatisfied, we believe it is part of good business, both for them and for ourselves, that they should seek employment elsewhere." It was quoted in the Free Press. John Walker's patience had clearly run out. Okay? That next Monday, he issued a sharply worded statement to the, okay, let's skip ahead on that one, to the press saying, "This strike is the last straw, as it has shown perfectly plain that we would be committing suicide from a financial standpoint if we brought the Miller Candy Company up here, employing 400 people, where there's a shortage of help, a shortage of housing, poor streets, and a city government whose hands were practically tied by being nearly equally divided between progressives and reactionaries, and we would be caught between two fires." John Walker also said in frustration, "We've decided to locate our Miller factory elsewhere because we're paying an equal amount in Boston, where 90% of our help is efficient, and in Burlington, only about 60% of our help are efficient, and the other 40% just want more wages." All right. So on Monday, July 28th, which happened fast, 1919, the Burlington Daily News published an article headlined, "Facing the Truth," and observed that the loss of the Miller Candy Company ought to lead to a sharp awakening in Burlington. "We want more houses, better streets, good fire protection, everything, in fact, that a progressive city should offer to those it would have to come to locate within its borders. On the eve of promised industrial expansion, it would surely be regrettable to have our plans miscarry. Burlington is due for a very busy time in the immediate future if her son is to remain in the ascendant. Newspaper editors in neighboring Vermont manufacturing communities also weighed in on the disappointing situation in Burlington. The Swanton Courier commented, "We believe President Walker of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company has given Burlington people to understand that it would be folly to establish the Milk and Candy Company in a city with general working conditions so unsatisfactory and fire protection so inadequate as in Burlington. Thus, they have lost a desirable and sizable industry because they, as a city, have failed to measure up to what, in the opinion of the directors of the concern, a town should be to deserve an industry of that character." Okay. And here we also have a clip from an editorial where the Virgins Enterprise could snipe in a little bit on the situation, saying, "When Burlington landed a big milk chocolate factory, it seemed as though the long-heralded new era had at last dawned, and that city would keep up the stride which would justify a raid on the state treasury of $200,000 for a barge terminal in Burlington that it was about to become a great industrial center. Alas, that bubble should have soon been pricked. The president of the chocolate company has made it plain that if they were to do it over again, it was doubtful that the company would go to the Queen City." While this is not complimentary in Burlington, it correctly describes the situation. If Burlington wants a few $100,000 more, which the chocolate company deserves to invest, it will have to adopt a different attitude towards big business. So for a broader global context, however, this was happening within a cascade of historically significant global, national, and local events that were unfolding during the summer of 1919 as the progressive era came to a turbulent close. Although the war in Europe was over, the world was changing rapidly in ways that would have long-standing repercussions. In July of that year, race riots in Washington, D.C. prompted martial law to be declared. Although ill and soon suffering from a debilitating stroke, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, who had supported racial segregation, authorized military troops to occupy the nation's capital to quell the violence. The United States House of Representatives passed an act to enforce the prohibition of alcoholic beverages on the federal level, a key step towards the imposition of prohibition nationally. And labor unrest during that July included a strike of 40,000 maritime workers demanding wage increases that blocked all shipping on most of the American East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico ports. Crisis had come to America. On August 11th, 1919, it was reported that the strike was over at the Burlington factory, and that 160 female workers would be returning to wrap chocolate bars. The breach of peace charges against Henry LaPointe were dismissed, and work at the factory continued. Nevertheless, in November of that year, John Walker admitted that there were, because of the various shortages of sugar brought on by those strikes along the waterfront, that there was a huge shortage of sugar, and as a result, the production at the Burlington factory would be virtually shut down.
Those dates are wrong.
Well, I'm waiting until we get there. Because, okay, they are right. He also announced that a $1.5 million shipment of cocoa beans from that West African island of São Tomé had just been purchased in Lisbon, Portugal for the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company, and that the Massachusetts company would soon be combining to put them into production. So they were still buying cocoa beans. Nevertheless, as I was saying, this Portuguese colony of São Tomé, which had just become the world's largest exporter of cocoa beans, at that time, within a month or so, there was a major infestation of thrips, okay? And these thrips virtually destroyed the crop on that African island. The result was a huge increase in the global price of cocoa beans. Coincidentally, a similar spread of these invasive insects, these thrips, has occurred in this year of 2024, which has led to a contemporary global cocoa supply shortage and dramatic increases in the wholesale price of cocoa beans and chocolate as we speak. So you see what has gone in the past year? Anybody try to buy chocolate? If you like chocolate, you better run for it, I tell you. So anyway, what to do? The Vermont Milk Chocolate Company soon decided to shift into doing something else, and they started making a lard-like vegetable shortening product from undisclosed materials at its new brick manufacturing plant here in Burlington. Marketed as Juanetta Shortening, the product was said to be developed by our friend John Walker as a substitute for pork-based lard, which had become very expensive and was in short supply. The timing seemed to be a good venture because of the shortage of the sugar and the cocoa beans. Nevertheless, it didn't really work out too well. By late in 1919, the city of Burlington was facing severe financial problems. A headline in the Free Press said, "City departments in financial distress." And one of the biggest financial distresses that was being put on the municipal budget came from the expense of laying that new water line down Pine Street to what was Park Avenue to serve the needs of the chocolate factory and the local neighborhoods. Because of that, Burlington Mayor J. Holmes Jackson vetoed a plan to install a new roadbed along Park Avenue, now Flynn Avenue, from Pine Street to the railroad tracks. And so there you have it, this ruddy dirt road, as it was, stayed for who knows how many more years. We're moving towards the end here. Okay, 1920, there was a protest here in Burlington because of the discontinuation of the electric streetcar system to the Lakeside cotton mill factory. Nevertheless, John J. Flynn, on the board of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory, maintained that the electric streetcars would continue to go down Flynn Avenue to that factory, which kind of upset a lot of the cotton factory workers. March 1920, Ernest Linderholm, who I mentioned earlier, the husband of his wife had become, soon to become nationally famous for her charity work, announced that he was leaving, and so too the superintendent of the Burlington factory resigned, and perhaps not coincidentally, the Massachusetts Chocolate Company in Boston quietly paid a fine without contest in U.S. Federal District Court in April 1920 for alleged violations to the federal Pure Food and Drug laws in response to charges that the company had been shipping chocolates adulterated with cocoa bean shells. Corners were perhaps being cut. It was also announced that there would be a dividend paid on the preferred stock for the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company stockholders, but immediately there was announcements were being put out for selling more stock by the company. Let's get more investors. Nevertheless, July 1920, John Walker abruptly announced his resignation as general manager of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company and of the Massachusetts Company. He said that he'd serve as president, but it was time to take a rest and to get as far away from work as possible. And he would soon be taking an extended vacation voyage to South America. So it was also soon announced in July that unemployment at that time in Burlington had been very high. The Porter Screen Company in Winooski, the American Woolen Company in Winooski, the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company are almost all completely closed down, almost entirely. And through this, thousands of Burlingtonians have been thrown out of work, 1920. On the evening of October 29th, 1920, Fred H. Roberts, the co-founder and vice president of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company and president of the Massachusetts Company, and numerous other business concerns, died of pneumonia at his big estate mansion in Wilmington, Massachusetts. He was 65 years old. It was later reported that Fred H. Roberts had sold many of his businesses to retire shortly before his death. Production did resume on a limited basis with less than 100 employees at the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory in 1921 at seriously reduced wages. Okay. John Walker came back from his extended break, offered a bleakly optimistic prognosis for the future of the company, saying our troubles are going to be over and we shall get through this bigger, better, with more reliable citizens, gaining strength and stability, learning from lessons of the past. Nevertheless, it was soon announced that his son-in-law, Ernest Linderholm, would be leaving Burlington and moving to Boston. 1922, more serious problems evolved. In this case, in June of 1922, a complicated lawsuit seeking $800,000 was filed in U.S. federal court in Montpelier against the Burlington firm by the Massachusetts Chocolate Company, its parent firm. In the suit, the Massachusetts Company sought control of all of the Burlington real estate, manufacturing, machinery, trucks, raw materials, and manufacturers' goods at the Burlington site. Okay? But it also became clear that the millionaire co-founder, Fred H. Roberts, had, because of his death, again, kind of like one of these Ponzi schemes, everything was collapsing around them. And millions of dollars were at stake, and the Massachusetts firm was on the verge of collapse, desperate for getting anything they could from anywhere. It became an incredibly complex legal case because John Walker, who we've heard so much about, served not only as the president and general manager of both the Burlington Chocolate Company, based chocolate company, and the Boston-based Massachusetts Chocolate Company, but so too had his son-in-law been the manager of this, and there was a big entanglement of the shareholders, and so anyway, a huge mess legally. Ultimately, they sought to have the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company declared bankrupt in order to have a receivership established to reorganize the firm. In a case heard in December of 1922, the United States District Court in Montpelier found that the Massachusetts Chocolate Company's petition against the Burlington Vermont Milk Chocolate Company should be dismissed. The complex legal case continued to be heard in U.S. District Court in Montpelier through 1923. John Walker and the company's treasurer were questioned about various complex financial arrangements and bookkeeping entries between the two companies, including the imposition of large commissions that the Boston firm was charging on its products made by its Burlington subsidiary. It also was revealed that nearly all of the peanut oil used to manufacture the vegetable shortening that I mentioned here was made as a byproduct of producing a peanut crust that was used on chocolate bars made in Burlington, and the Burlington firm wasn't getting paid for it. There were a whole bunch of other hidden charges and expenses that came out in the district courts. And ultimately, there was a surprise verdict that was issued on June 1st, 1923, awarding $351,502 to the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company at the expense of the Massachusetts Chocolate Company. This was one of the largest settlements that had ever been recorded in the state of Vermont in a lawsuit at the time. Soon the equipment that was being used in Burlington for the fake lard stuff was being put up for sale on auction. The Internal Revenue Service got involved in 1925 because of unpaid taxes. And ultimately, it was announced that an amicable divorce had been agreed to between the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company and the Massachusetts Chocolate Company, and that basically those shareholders in the Burlington-based company would get what was here in Burlington. So the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company continued to run here, but not making chocolate. That was well over, okay? They leased out major areas of the factory complex. In 1935, some of the companies that were there included the Canada Broom Handle Company, Vermont Maple Orchards, Westmore Savage Division of the Westinghouse Electric Supply Company. Also, the Civilian Conservation Corps had leased space in there. John J. Flynn, you know about, continued to serve as president of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Factory, although they were not making chocolate anymore, but they were the owners of the real estate. And it continued to serve in this way well until through the 1930s. John Walker of Belmont, Massachusetts, the founding president of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company we've talked about. He died on January 17th, 1942. Charles P. Smith, one of the major investors from Burlington, died in 1937. John J. Flynn died in 1940. And in 1948, the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company's shareholders settled an agreement with their major bondholder, the John J. Flynn estate, to sell the property to Justin Kelly and Associates. This then was the legal termination of the Vermont Milk Chocolate Company, and this was ultimately confirmed in Burlington District Court in May of 1949. The property continued to be used for a variety of manufacturing instances. It was recorded in the Vermont Historic Sites and Structures Survey as being contributing to the statewide significance in 1978. In 1999, Farrington Properties purchased 3 of the former buildings at 208 Flynn Avenue for $1.4 million. Architect Brenda Alvarez and her partner, David Farrington, preserved the complex by renovating about 10,000 square feet of the old factory buildings, providing rehabilitated areas for a wide range of incubator spaces for a variety of uses. And today, this rehabilitated historic factory complex at 208 Flynn Avenue serves as Burlington's one of the most vibrant business centers with a cafe, brand name studios, human services center, daycare center, warehouse space, and offices for engineers, architects, as well as for advertising, media, real estate, and development companies. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your patience. And I would like to acknowledge so many people who have helped out on this project, including a good number of work that the students have done on these projects over the years, the various archives that we have in the city, Ethan Allen Homestead and so on. But what I'd like to do next is to really open the floor up to you all and have what we might call a little bit of a discussion on all of this. Let's have a little seminar here. What do you think? Reactions. David.
Couple quick things. One, when I was a young man, 18-ish, I'm now 62, so it's quite a while ago. For 3 years, I worked for McAuliffe Office Products Company. And, they were on Church Street and they moved to Cherry Street. But that whole time that I worked for them in the 70s to early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, 3 years, they had the warehouse was on Flint Avenue and their space was in the old Vermont Chocolate.
Yeah.
And you went in and, he stressed in his presentation that, the trucks came in with raw materials, these big, huge volumes of paper, that we sold, and it came in by train, a lot of it, and came right there, and then they get other trucks, just came by truck, and so I was very familiar with the inside of the factory. It was one of my jobs to go down and get, get some stuff that we were out of I worked in the retail sales and shipping on Cherry Street, so it was a great building. And so my question,
Sure.
For a educational question, how did did you come across in the research how the Hershey company sort of figured into that timeline because they got government contracts in World War I to supply chocolate to, and then again in World War II because by that time Vermont milk chocolate had gone by the way. But did you come across any Hershey? They were obviously competitors with the Massachusetts and the Vermont milk chocolate company of the day. And I just wondered if you had any.
That's a really good question. And my sense is that Hershey was really very, very prosperous on the domestic front.
Okay.
And somehow, these are some of these. Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? How the Massachusetts company through the Vermont company were getting these huge government contracts. It's somebody had some connections, and I suspect it would have been through Roberts. He was extremely wealthy and powerful, but there's always more to a story. There's always more to a story, and this would be a lot of fun to explore. Gail, do you have a question? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, okay. Please.
I was just wondering if the Lumiere brothers and the chocolate company were contemporaneous with each other.
There was kind of an overlap. The Lumiere factory, which is the next one down on Flint Avenue across the tracks, they came in. They're a big firm from France to make glass plate negatives and so on, taking advantage of the water from the lake. And I think what it really does is it kind of represents this era of early 20th century manufacturing that was going on here with access to the rail and workers and so on. So it's fun to look at that relationship.
And it was about workers. The Lumiere was here in 1903.
Yeah, very early. Yeah.
And, it was really such a major industrial spot.
Yeah.
And certainly the railroad, but the worker availability seemed to be a big attraction.
Yeah.
What have you been able yet with all this research? You're probably taking a week's break and going on to the next one to find out about some of the workers who worked for the chocolate factory.
Yeah, this has been one of the sort of part of the story that I've been very fascinated with, and perhaps one of the major sources, kind of archival sources for this that I've been tapping into have been the Burlington City directories. And I think from that, what we're clearly seeing by the names is a good number of the workers were coming from Quebec, as well as other areas. But there are many, many French names there. And it was sort of that period where, hey, let's face it, during the late 1890s, early 20th century, there were kind of rough times, I think, for a lot of the Quebec population. And there was this ability for workers to come in, as well as from elsewhere. They were advertising heavily in Rutland for workers, so it was really kind of regional, looking for workers. But again, I think what really kind of came out of this, of course, was okay, when you get this industry growing and you're bringing in the workers, where are they going to live? And what are we talking about today? I mean, with regard to the housing situation, you know, it's affordable housing, and how is that being addressed, and so on. So, also, I mean, while you're there, could you tell us a little bit about how some of your recent events, I think sort of one of the sub-themes that I really wanted to touch on here today is this idea of public history. You know, rather than just sort of focusing on monuments and pedestals and grand things, what we have here in this building is an amazing story about local history, the people, things that are positive and not so positive, the challenges that people went through. And I think, you know, there's some efforts underway to kind of broaden out some of the stories. So maybe you could share us a little bit of what's going on.
The answer is yes.
Sure. So Gail Rosenberg, Elise Guyette, and with 2 other women, we are trying to start Burlington History and Culture Center. Because the only place you can come to learn any Burlington history is here. And that's a very particular perspective on our history. I mean, we want more stories like this. We want to know about the work. We want to know about the people who actually laid the bricks, actually built everything and actually worked in it. And that's a number of different immigrant groups. So we're really, we are on first year of a 3-year grant from the Vermont Humanities. We got $10,000 a year for 3 years to build a community vision for this center. And we're on the first year right now. We're having focus groups and interviews. A lot of people have read for that.
I have a survey, and I know many of you find your email in the front. If it would be okay with you, we would love to use those emails. Send you a survey. The survey is to find out what are the stories that you want to see and hear told. What are the best ways to present them? And we, at this moment, don't have a particular space in mind. Well, we have many in mind, but do we have a center, a hub? Do we have satellites through the city? And not just looking at having all the history in the building, but we're looking at tours and
maybe, you know, so yeah, we don't know.
so we are very happy to talk to anyone who will send you some information. We'd love to get back your feedback. And what this is not going to be a museum of the 4 co-founders. It's a museum of the community. What in Burlington do we need to know? And the industrial part of the area that Tom talked about is just exciting. It's one of many sites around the city where exciting things are happening. And we want to know about the people who did the building. So,
Great.
amazing what you presented. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and thank you so much for the Ethan on Homestead. I mean, for you know, catering today, bringing us all together, because I really hope that this is a catalyst. I mean, you
Well,
folks
this is
do.
very exciting for us, I think.
Yeah.
We apologize for going over, but I didn't want to.
Yeah, well, we'll cut the question short then and go and have some treats, huh?
And I know that some people have to go because, you know, they have other things to do, and
Right.
we usually just do the hour, but it's been so wonderful for Elise and Gail to get up and be able to explain what's going on, because what else is the Ethan Allen Homestead
Right.
about except everything that's gone on in Burlington. So I think this is just exciting that, you know, the people are here and at the beginning of this, so that we can perhaps help in, you know, each other in
absolutely.
various ways.
Good.
So I encourage anybody to thank all these people.
Yeah, and thank you all.